At my grandson's baby shower, my daughter-in-law held up the blanket I'd spent 4 months knitting, wrinkled her nose, and dropped it in the trash can. "We only use designer things here," she said, smiling for the camera her friend was holding. The room did that awful half-laugh. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I walked over, lifted my blanket out of the bin, folded it into my bag, and went home early without a single word. That night my son called me, his voice breaking. "Mom, please, what was folded inside that blanket?" I sat down at my kitchen table, the blanket in my lap, my husband's last gift still tucked safe in its lining, and I said very gently, "Why do you ask, Kyle?" "Because here's what my daughter-in-law threw in the garbage in front of 20 people for the crime of being homemade. And here's what happened when the whole family finally found out." Welcome to Family Justice Vault, where the gift they call cheap is usually the only thing in the room money could never buy. My name is Darlene Mercer. I'm 68, and for 40 years I ran a tailoring shop on Bell Street. I know thread the way some people know music. My hands aren't what they were. The arthritis came on slow, then all at once. I say that so you understand what 4 months of knitting cost me, and why I did it anyway. My daughter-in-law looked at me and saw a harmless old lady with yarn. I let her, because being underestimated is its own kind of quiet. My husband Frank passed 10 months before that shower. 43 years of marriage, then a Tuesday in the hospital, then a house far too quiet. Frank wasn't flashy. He drove the same truck 19 years and thought in decades, not moments. He'd wanted to be a grandfather more than anything, but he didn't make it. The baby was just a due date when his heart finally set down its tools. A week before he died, he asked me to bring him an old cigar box from his closet. Inside were savings bonds, rubber-banded by year, going back almost 30 years. On the envelope in his blocky pencil, "For our first grandbaby, started the year Kyle turned 10. They'd come due, just under $50,000. Then he told me the part that mattered more than the money. Don't just hand them an envelope. They'll spend it on a stroller and forget where it came from. Sew them into something. Make her open the blanket, Dar. Make them find it. Make it last." So I knitted. Cream-colored wool, a border of tiny blue sailboats because Frank loved the water. In one corner, small enough you'd have to look, his initials, FM. It took 4 months and my hands made me pay for every row. Underneath, I sewed a flat inner pocket, the kind I used to hide money in coat linings for travelers. Into it I folded all 30 years of bonds, and one more thing. A letter Frank had dictated to me in the hospital, sealed, addressed to the grandchild he'd never meet. To be opened when you're 18. Love, Grandpa Frank. I stitched the pocket shut, wrapped the whole thing in plain cream paper, tied it with blue ribbon, and drove to the baby shower with the box on the seat where Frank used to sit. My daughter-in-law Madison grew up the only child of a woman named Gail, who measures the world in labels. Madison curates everything: a designer nursery, a registry full of brand names, and now a baby who'd become the ultimate accessory. Underneath it all I think she's frightened, the way her mother raised her to be, that if anyone looks too closely they'll see something cheap. She just didn't know what she was about to throw away when she proved it in front of 20 people with a camera running. And then there's my son Kyle. Gentle, funny, a man who spent his life avoiding conflict the way some people avoid heights. After Frank died, he came apart quietly, the way good men do, calling me late just to talk about his dad. He knew exactly who his father was, which is exactly why, when the truth came out, it didn't break Madison. It broke him, because Kyle was sitting right there. He watched his wife call his dead father's gift homemade and drop it in the trash, and he laughed along, the nervous laugh, and said nothing. He didn't know what was inside. But he knew the blanket was from his grieving mother's hands, and he let it go in the bin to avoid a scene. That's what he'd carry, not Madison's cruelty, his own silence. The shower was Madison's garden soiree, white peonies, a balloon arch, a backdrop with the baby's name in gold script. They'd named him Hudson because it tested well. I sat near the edge with my plain cream box and my secret, and I smiled every time someone glanced at it with pity. I had no idea I was about to watch a stranger drop my husband into a garbage can. Frank's sister Caroline sat beside me. "Is that the famous blanket?" she whispered. "Frank told me what you were putting in it." I told her his orders. "Make her open it herself, I'll point her to the seam after." Caroline chuckled. He always did love a bit of theater. I think about that exchange often. If I'd warned the room first, none of what followed would have happened. But I never imagined anyone would simply throw a handmade blanket away. The designer gifts piled up beside Madison's chair. A cashmere onesie, a diaper bag worth a month's rent, a stroller named like a sports car. Then mine was last. Gail read the tag with gentle condescension. Madison unwrapped it, held it up by two corners like checking it for stains, and I watched her register the unevenness that means a human hand made this. Her nose wrinkled. "Oh, did you make this?" Before I could answer, she was already talking to the camera. "That's so sweet, very homemade," Gail laughed. Bless her heart, I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong. Madison stood, blanket over her arm, walked to the trash can lined with a crisp white bag, and held it out like a magician with a scarf. "I love Grandma, but we have a whole aesthetic for the nursery. We only use designer things here," and she let go. My blanket, Frank's sailboats, Frank's initials, Frank's $50,000, Frank's last letter to a grandson he'd never meet, dropped into the trash on top of torn wrapping paper. The room laughed, the nervous kind. Brooke's phone caught all of it, and my son stood against the wall, went pale, opened his mouth, and closed it again. That was the worst second of the day. Not the blanket in the bin, my son's mouth closing. I had a choice in that moment. I could have shouted the truth at her right there. Part of me wanted to. But the bonds were safe, sewn shut, and Madison hadn't found them. A camera was already recording her own cruelty. And I realized the worst punishment I could give her wasn't a scene. It was the truth, delivered later, when she could no longer pretend she didn't know. So I walked to the trash can, lifted the blanket out, brushed off the paper scraps, folded it the way 40 years behind a counter teaches your hands to fold without thinking, and tucked it into my bag. "Oh, did you want it back? Sorry, take it," Madison said brightly, covering. "It's all right, dear," I said, perfectly steady. "It's not really your kind of thing." "I'll keep it." That steadiness bothered her more than anger would have. I said my goodbyes and walked out with my back straight. I didn't cry until I reached the car, and when I did, the blanket still smelled faintly of garbage, and that was what undid me. That Frank's 30 years of patient love had spent 2 minutes smelling like a trash can for someone's page. But grief and clarity can ride in the same car. By the time my tears stopped, I'd gone very calm and very certain. I would not give Madison those bonds, not like this, not into hands that called legacies tacky without a logo. But baby Hudson, innocent of all of it, still deserved his grandfather's gift. So somewhere on that drive home, I started thinking like a tailor again. Not how to make a scene, how to make this last exactly the way Frank asked. Caroline called the second I walked in, ashamed, telling me she'd been so rattled after I left that she'd let it slip to Kyle what was sewn inside the blanket he'd just watched his wife throw away. "He went white as a sheet," she said. "Left right after, didn't say a word to Madison." I understood that somewhere across town, my son was driving home with that information detonating inside him. I set the kettle on and waited because I knew he'd call. While I waited, I took a seam ripper to the pocket, just to check, not to remove anything. The bonds were exactly as I'd left them. I held Frank's letter and thought of the hospital room where he dictated it, pausing for breath between sentences. He'd wanted a teenager someday to open that envelope and meet his grandfather for the first time. Madison had nearly thrown that meeting away for a laugh, without ever once feeling along the seam. 3 minutes later, Kyle called, his voice already broken. He told me later what those minutes had been like. Standing by the wall, swallowing the urge to grab the blanket back, because making a scene would ruin Madison's day. Telling himself it was just a blanket. Then Caroline's whisper, then the floor disappearing. He'd walked out without confronting anyone, sat shaking in his car, and called the one person who'd know. "Mom, please tell me you took the blanket home." "I have it, sweetheart. It's right here." He exhaled like a man surfacing from deep water. "Mom, what was folded inside that blanket?" I could have softened it. I didn't. He was 32 and a father now, and some things need to be heard in full. "Your father's savings bonds, Kyle. Every birthday and bonus for almost 30 years. They came due. They're worth just under $50,000, and his last letter, dictated to me in the hospital, for Hudson to open at 18. That's what you watched go into the trash." The line went quiet, and then my gentle, peacekeeping son made a sound I hadn't heard since he was a small boy. "I didn't stop her, Mom." I was right there, and I didn't stop her. I let him cry. Sometimes that's the whole job of being a mother. "How are you so calm?" he asked. "Because your father's gift is safe, and the baby is going to get every cent of it," I told him. Nothing precious was actually lost today, except maybe some illusions, and those needed losing. Then I heard real spine in his voice for the first time in years. "Tell me what you want, and I'll do it. For once I'll do the right thing instead of the easy one." I told him, "I want the whole family in one room, and I want to give Hudson his grandfather's gift properly, out loud. Where everyone can see exactly what it is, and what almost happened to it." Frank said make her open the blanket, so we would, just later than planned. Kyle told Madison that night. Her first words were not, "Oh my God," or "What have I done?" Her first words were, "How was I supposed to know? Who sews money into a blanket?" This is kind of her fault, honestly. Caught doing something unforgivable, her instinct wasn't remorse, it was defense. Finding the angle, where the grieving widow was somehow the villain for not labeling her gift properly. Not once did she say, "I'm sorry," and mean it. So the next week, I went to the bank and confirmed the bonds, $47,000 and change. Then I saw a woman named Patricia and set up a locked education trust for Hudson, administered independently, untouchable by Madison, by Kyle, by me. The child's, and only the child's, exactly as Frank intended. It cost me something to lock my own son out too, but the cleanest way to honor a wish is to make it impossible to bend. Hudson arrived on a rainy Thursday, 7 pounds and furious with Frank's exact frown. Holding him, I had to sit down. For a few days, exhausted and human, even Madison softened. I let myself hope the gathering might not be necessary. Then I saw her first posted photo of Hudson, staged, filtered, captioned with brand names, and I knew the softness was a phase. The values were the structure, which meant Frank's gift mattered more than ever, so I sent the invitations. Sunday dinner, my house, everyone. I laid the washed blanket in the center of the table, the garbage smell gone, the sailboats bright. We ate first. I insisted, "You don't do hard things on an empty stomach." Then I cleared the plates, put my hand flat on the blanket and said, "I'd like to give Hudson his gift from his grandfather now, properly this time." The table went still. "Madison, you held this blanket a few weeks ago and decided what it was worth, and you threw it away. I'd like to show you and everyone here what you were actually holding." I picked up the seam ripper, opened the pocket in front of all of them, and laid the contents on the table one at a time. Like a banker counting out a fortune. "These are your father's savings bonds, Kyle. A few at a time for almost 30 years, starting the year you turned 10. They're worth $47,000. The number went around the table like a cold draft. "And this is the last letter your husband ever wrote, for Hudson to open on his 18th birthday, so a boy who'll never meet his grandfather can hear from him anyway." Frank's exact words to me were, "Make her open the blanket, make them find it, make it last." I looked at Madison. "This is what you called homemade. This is what you dropped in the trash on camera in front of 20 people because it didn't match your aesthetic." Madison reached for the victim role immediately. "You can't put this on me. That's basically a trap. You set me up." "I didn't let you do anything, Madison," I said, still calm. "I assumed, foolishly, that no one would throw a handmade blanket in the garbage." That assumption was my only mistake. The throwing was entirely yours. It was a joke for the camera. I know. That's rather the whole problem. I told her plainly. There's no tag on love, no brand on 30 years of a man saving for a child he might not live to meet. She couldn't see it because she'd never been taught how to look. When Gail tried to defend her, I simply said, "Gail, you taught her how to look. I'd sit this one out." She did. Then I laid out what happens now. Hudson gets every cent, but locked in an independent trust, untouchable by anyone, because I couldn't hand an open inheritance to a household that throws legacies in the trash for content. The blanket comes home with me until I see it will be honored. And I am Hudson's grandmother, not optional, not a relative tolerated at holidays. Nobody argued with the terms. There was one more thing. Frank had written a short opening message for the day the family learned about the gift and made me promise to read it aloud. I opened the smaller envelope from my cardigan pocket and read his words, that he'd been saving since Kyle was 10, because the best thing his own grandfather gave him wasn't money. It was proof someone was thinking of him before he existed. That the blanket was proof Hudson was wanted. That he hoped his family would learn the difference between what a thing costs and what it's worth, and that his wife already knew it. The room went silent. Caroline wept. Kyle pressed his face to his sleeping son's head, shoulders shaking, and Madison looked at the blanket she'd thrown away and for the first time actually saw it. I softened then, the way you let a room breathe after a hard truth. I didn't do this to humiliate you, I told her. I did it because that baby is going to grow up learning your values, and someday he'll need to know there was another way to measure things. To Kyle, I said, you stayed quiet because it was easier. The blanket survived because I refused to be quiet about what it was worth, even when silence would have been so much more comfortable. That's the inheritance, son. Not the bonds. Here's how it settled in the months after. The trust sits locked and growing, exactly as Frank intended. Brooke's video, the one of Madison dropping the blanket on camera, had already been seen by more of the family than she realized before she took it down. And for a while, she was known in her own circle as the woman who threw away her child's inheritance for a laugh. She never did fully apologize. She isn't built for it, but she asked me a few weeks later in a small voice if I'd teach her to knit. I said yes. She made Hudson a lopsided little hat. She kept it. Kyle changed the most. He came to my kitchen table a month later and told me he hadn't failed his father by letting the blanket go in the trash. He'd failed him 100 times before that. Every time he stayed quiet to keep Madison happy. The blanket was just the one he couldn't unsee. He and Madison are in counseling now, something I never thought I'd see. He's told Hudson he'll teach him to fish himself, the way Frank would have. I'm still learning how to not choose easier, he told me, but I'm choosing it on purpose now. The blanket lives on Hudson's crib now. It took months before I was sure the house it was going into had learned, even a little, what it was holding. When I finally brought it over, Madison had cleared a place of honor for it and put away the designer throw that used to sit there. She touched the corner with Frank's initials and said quietly, I never even noticed that was there. Most people don't, I said. You have to know to look. My hands are worse this winter. Some mornings, the needles win and I can't knit at all. But I'm making Hudson a sweater slowly. A few rows on the good days. His grandfather's initials hidden in the cuff where he'll find them someday, if he knows to look. Because that's what we do, the homemade grandmas. We sew ourselves into things quietly and we wait. If there's one thing I'd hand you from all of this, it's this. The world will keep telling you that worth is something you can read off a label. The most valuable things in any room are almost always the quiet ones, made by hand, given without logos, easy to throw away if you've never been taught how to look. Learn how to look. And whatever you love, sew it into something that lasts.